Revenues were up 40% year on year. EPS were up 60% year on year.
But last week's surprisingly strong earnings report wasn't enough to stop the volatility for Taiwan Semiconductor.
The reaction was short-lived. At the end of the day, it came right back and it's now sitting at a decline to start the week.
Despite all of the uncertainties, several analysts are still stepping up with a bullish outlook for TSM.
Consensus price target today is set at $220 a share. So that's around 50% upside.
MarketBeat's Gabriel Ossorio-Mazilli shares why he believes TSM is the perfect buy-the-dip opportunity for a company that is uniquely poised to thrive in this tariff-stricken market.
I think that the worst might be behind for TSM.
Will you agree, or do you think the volatility for TSM and maybe all semiconductors might be just getting started? Let's dive in. Gabriel, great to have you back again today talking about Taiwan Semiconductors after their earnings report and kind of what's happening with that stock. But before we get right into TSM, let's talk about chip stocks in general. What have they been doing the last few weeks in the market?
Well, as you may know, the tariffs have been focused on semiconductors and chips coming out of China and other Asian regions. And of course, the subject of negativity, volatility, and uncertainty has centered around those stocks as well. So names like Intel, Taiwan, Nvidia, and of course the constituents that rely on these chips like Apple, Samsung, even Google, Microsoft have gone on a crazy run of volatility lately. So it all depends now on what President Trump decides to do when it comes to these tariffs, how China reacts, and what happens to the supply chain and logistics moving forward. So for now, there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of volatility, but that could also mean a lot of opportunity if you know what to look out for.
Yeah, and I think TSM in the middle of all of this is kind of uniquely positioned because they do already have some forward steps to moving some of that manufacturing to the US. Let's talk about those plans and the impact it's having on TSM in the middle of this market compared to all the other stocks that are out there.
You're absolutely right. The moves from Taiwan into the United States when it comes to supply chains, when it comes to logistics, have already been implemented by a $165 billion investment to build fabs or the factories where the chips are being made in states like Ohio and Arizona, right? So this is part of the previous Chips and Science Act, but this is on top of that. TSM, along with Intel and other chip makers, decided to voluntarily invest into the supply chain for the United States. So that not only brings a direct investment into the country, but also puts them at ease with the new administration's plans, tariffs, and all the other implications, which is why the exemptions were made for chips and semiconductors coming out of China, considering that these companies are willing to, quote unquote, play ball with China, with the differentiating supply chains coming into the United States. So I think that when it comes to uncertainty, markets and investors can already see that they're not going to be as punished as everyone thought because of these nimbleness, right? Because of this ease of change when it comes to investing in the country and shifting their businesses as a whole in order to play ball, like I said, quote unquote, with the administration and their plans to onshore logistics and supply chains.
Yeah, those plans may be working and adjusting quickly, but the actual reality of getting those manufacturing facilities up and going is still going to be a ways off. Let's talk about, just is making that step towards moving them to the US enough to change the confidence of the stock price, or will we not really see anything until a few years when those sites are actually up and running?
Well, that is very true, and that is a factor that everyone has to think about. In my opinion, I think that could take, like you said, a couple of years, maybe even more. And I think the first one to break ground was Intel, and that happened around 2022, and we still haven't seen much of the supply chain shift 3 years later. So I think that projecting forward 5 years, 6 years for that change to happen needs to carry on flexibility when it comes to where the tariffs are at, where exemptions may be, and where the indications of further tariffs or further exemptions are going to lay on. So I think that while those projects are being taken on, you can already see where the pain points are, where the flexibility lies when it comes to these tariffs. So it's all focused on chips and semiconductors coming out of China. So whether those plans take on water or not, I think that you can already see the flexibility again with the negotiations and where the concessions are being made today.
Well, let's get right into TSM and their earnings report that just came out last week. We didn't see a major reaction in the stock price to earnings. But what does that tell us about kind of how this report went?
Well, speaking of the price action, the stock went up by around 6% after market right after the report. But as you said, the reaction was short-lived. At the end of the day, it came right back and it's now sitting at a decline to start the week. Of course, it might be idiosyncratic, caused by the company outlooks and views, or it might just be systematic, being dragged down by the S&P 500 starting the week on a red note. But when it comes to fundamentals, I think that the broader view for earnings was a lot better than people expected, because one, you have the impacts of tariffs, the impacts of additional costs, the impacts of what we just mentioned about bringing logistics back and investing hundreds of billions of dollars into the United States. That all has an impact on earnings per share, on future demand, on new orders. And I think that the fearful outlook for TSM didn't really play out. In fact, they reported 60% increase year on year on their bottom line earnings. And I think that that wouldn't have been possible if new orders were down, if costs were already being implemented. And remember, all of those views were taking place since December, when President Trump was elected, and he was already letting the market know, hey, tariffs are coming and I'm going to focus on China. And Taiwan and the supply chains were going to be heavily affected by these. But revenues were up 40% year on year. Like I said, EPS were up 60% year on year. And there weren't a lot of commentaries coming out of management with regards to tariffs or any negative impacts, other than it could be cyclical, it could be an impact, but nothing really concrete when it comes to actual demand and actual declines of orders so far. So I think TSM might be in the clear. And as we mentioned in other videos as well, you can't have an NVIDIA without TSM. You can't have Apple without TSM. So TSM being so vital and pivotal in the technology sector, I don't think that neither President Xi or President Trump are going to let this company go down the drain. And right now, it trades at around 65-67% of its 52-week high. And I think that is because markets were already pricing in some of these fears, which aren't really becoming concrete or crystallized in today's market, in today's earnings and outlooks even. So I think that the worst might be behind for TSM. But again, we're not in the clear until both President Xi and President Trump come to an agreement where the United States and China can say, okay, let's play along and let's do business together once more.
Yeah, I think that uncertainty is why you have stocks like TSM not really reacting in the market so much to the fundamentals of what are their earnings, look at the increases that they're having in sales and contracts. But it's really more of all of this reaction is happening based on fear and the uncertainty of what's going on. And it feels like that same uncertainty is impacting those big tech names you just mentioned. If you are still bullish on the future of these big names, check out our free report right now on 7 stocks that will still be magnificent in 2025. You can scan the QR code or click the link in the description of the video to get that full report on marketbeat.com right now. So Gabriel, how do investors manage a market like this, where you might have some fundamentally great reports coming from TSM, but still volatility happening in the stock price?
Well, one thing that everyone recommends in times like these is to stay nimble, right? So don't fall in love with one view, because it might change within 30 minutes. It might change within 24 hours. A new headline, a new tweet, a new announcement might render your thesis useless. So you have to be nimble. This is a hit and run market. But when it comes to taking the long view, you got to think about a couple of things, right? First, the fundamental positioning that TSM has in the industry. As I said, there's no Nvidia without TSM, there's no Apple without TSM. So in the long run, nobody can really say with 100% certainty that TSM is going to remain at these lower levels, remain within the negativity that it is subject to today. Because if you do that, then you indirectly have to admit that Nvidia is going to lose its crown, Apple is going to lose its crown, and then the whole technology sector is going to shift. To what? Nobody knows what. So that being said, you can't really expect TSM to stay down this much longer, right? And analyst expectations haven't shifted really. And if anything, they are poised to increase or be reiterated higher upon these new earnings. In fact, the consensus price target today is set at $220 a share. So that's around 50% upside from where the stock trades today. Now, as you know, analysts aren't really willing to boost the stock that is subject to such negativity, that is subject to such bearish price action lately. So the fact that they're still willing to risk not only their reputations, but perhaps their careers on boosting the stock should tell you all you need to know when it comes to TSM.
All right, great information for investors to consider when looking at TSM right now, Gabriel. Thank you for going through this stock. Let us know what you think. Do you think TSM will likely go higher very soon, or are you waiting out the volatility to see where the bottom actually lies for this stock and other chip makers? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Like and subscribe to our channel for more market news. We'd love to have you follow along with all of our content. Thanks for joining us, everyone. As always, happy investing.